This is an initiative by Toastmasters and particularly Division L here in Dubai to let you know a little bit more, or a lot more actually, about podcasting. So if you wanted to start a podcast, maybe build a brand and become an expert in that field, I've got great news for you. You're in the right place, because today we have an industry expert in our midst. And it's my absolute pleasure to be introducing to you today a lady who has over 20 years in sales and marketing experience. She's worked with some of the largest brands in the world: Emirates Airlines, British Airways, Puma. She holds a first-class business degree, MBA, from Michael Smurfit Business School in Dublin. She's a published author of a book entitled Driving Loyalty in Convenience Retail. And she's now a recognized professional podcaster. Her brand is Let's Talk Loyalty, and it's just celebrated its first birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And it's enjoyed over 17,500 plays so far. It's my pleasure to introduce you, everybody, to Paula Thomas.
Great to be here, Ian. Thank you for the great welcome.
Now, many of us here have an interest in starting a podcast, and you've been on an incredible podcasting journey. Please, could you share with us how it all began?
Of course, Ian. I think there's a couple of things. First of all, from a professional perspective, I was looking for something new. I really believe in innovation as a principle that I suppose I admire in other people in business. So I wanted to do something within my industry that would show that I had that same innovative capability. Now, at the same time, there was magazines from my industry that were piling up. They were remaining unread, and I was feeling increasingly guilty that I wasn't up to date on what was happening in the industry. So I did some research and I realized that nobody was podcasting about running loyalty programs on a professional basis. And because I have almost a decade now of experience running loyalty programs for clients, I thought, let me actually connect the podcast opportunity and that format, which is so easy, with my professional interest. So that's how it all started.
Fantastic. And you've really focused heavily on loyalty. Can you tell us about your experience a little bit more in loyalty and why it's so important to you?
For sure. I think what is really interesting about loyalty marketing is it's a very niche area within the overall marketing field. And certainly for me, when I first ran a loyalty program, it was with no training and no background. And I didn't even have my business degree at the time. So a lot of loyalty programs, senior managers around the world are in the same position. They have earned that position, but they've never been trained in that niche discipline. So what I realized is actually we all need to share knowledge as much as possible. And obviously it's very difficult and time consuming to travel to conferences. So podcasting is a very time efficient way to learn professionally. And I think many of us have listened to podcasts on a personal basis that we're interested in, but increasingly I'm finding that lots of professionals are saying, let me listen in order to learn. So it's a very powerful channel in that way.
Yeah, well, certainly we as Toastmasters, we're always looking to increase our skills, become better communicators and leaders, and learn. So listening to podcasts is excellent. And you've honed in on a really catchy, fantastic, in my opinion, name, Let's Talk Loyalty. Can you maybe give us some advice on, maybe we want to start a podcast, how you chose your name and how important it is to have that brand recognition?
Yeah, Yeah, for sure. For me, Ian, it's probably the same principles as naming any company or anything that you want people to connect with. If you think about the mindset of all of us as consumers, we're extremely busy. And for something to cut through to catch our attention is actually very difficult. So for me, the key principle is it's something super easy, very clear and descriptive. And of course, ideally, the website should be available. So I toyed around with lots of ideas. I looked at other podcasts. So, for example, I had one idea before, like loyalty matters, because somebody had something matters. So there are some quite generic formats that you can maybe use. But I found somebody was using loyalty matters, and I thought, okay, let's talk loyalty. And actually, what I also like about it, Ian, is it gives me permission to talk about the emotion of loyalty, which is actually extremely important for companies. Even if you're not running a structured loyalty program with points, you still want to drive consumer loyalty. So it's quite an open title. So I like that as well.
Fantastic. And how did you set about formatting the structure of your podcast, and how has it evolved over time?
There are plenty of formats, as you will know, Ian. For me, because I was on a journey of learning, I realized that what I really wanted to do was to ask really difficult questions from people who had more experience than I did. So I heard actually a great quote from a famous marketeer that I know you also know, Mr. Seth Godin. And he was talking about podcasting, and he basically said, if you have a podcast, it's like having the coolest party in town and you're the host. So if you invite people to come, they will all show up. And I have actually found that to be true. Now, with one exception, I yet have not asked Mr. Seth Godin himself to come on my podcast, but he's on my wish list. Everybody else pretty much has said yes, and I've been able to talk to some extraordinary people that I would never have had access to before.
Absolutely. And having listened to one or two of your podcasts now, Paula, you really do throw a cool party as well.
Thank you.
Definitely the coolest in town, so congratulations on that. But we as people starting out possibly as podcasters, what advice would you give to a new starter? What sort of equipment should we need as a start-off podcaster?
This is a very important question, Ian, and one that I think you can spend a lot of time and a lot of money. My main advice is keep it simple. The only piece of equipment I have is exactly what you're looking at on my head right now. So it's a Sennheiser PC8 is the name of it, and it's a telephony headset, I think designed for like a call center. And it's the second headset I bought. The very first one I got actually was one that just sits on a desktop. But what I realized is I actually move my body when I'm speaking. So the audio volume was changing when I had a fixed microphone. So what I like with this is I can move around and change my position, and obviously the microphone stays exactly the same. So I also like about this particular headset is it connects just on a USB. So it doesn't matter whether I'm in a studio, whether I'm at home, it can connect anywhere. And if any of my guests ask for advice as well, I will also say, just get this one, and I know it'll plug into anything. So this is the only piece of equipment I use in terms of hardware. And I guess software is the other piece, which is really important. For me, I record on Zoom, so clearly everybody attending this is very familiar with Zoom. There are other types of software, so I'm considering moving to what they call browser-based recording equipment or software, where you can literally just send somebody a link, and that's quite an advanced, but a paid form, obviously, of software. For me, as I said, it's the headset, it's Zoom, and the only other thing I've done is I do go to a professional recording studio, and that I have found is a really useful and important thing to do for the audio quality.
Yes, I'm really shocked actually to hear that it's just that headset that you use, because your diction is very, very clear. Have you had any professional voice training or anything like this to have such amazing clear diction?
Oh, thank you, Ian. As a child, I did, would you believe, but not with any clear vision, obviously, of a career. So that just happened to be something my school did. I definitely considered it, and I still believe that performing as either a voiceover artist or clearly now, as I describe myself, a professional podcaster, I firmly believe in continuous education. So I may go and get some further training as well, but for now, I'm getting great feedback. So thank you for that. So for now, I'm quite happy with how I sound.
Fantastic. So one of the things that I'm sure everybody that's joined the call today wants to know is, okay, we've put together our podcast. What do we do now? What are the post-production activities that we need to consider as a podcaster?
Yeah, there's a lot of work involved, I would first of all say, Ian. And one of my favorite statistics, actually, I think it's important to bear in mind for anyone considering going down this path. They tell us that 90% of podcasts never get past 7 episodes. So I think you really need to be aware, and most people, I believe, fail because they forget or don't realize how much work is involved. So I had that information, and I waited a long time to make the decision to start so that I could really have plenty of commitment and create the space for it. So we've talked about the equipment, and we'll talk separately, I'm sure, about the guests and the content. But from a purely practical point of view, I use a hosting platform, which is called Anchor.fm. There are loads of hosting platforms. They have all of the pros and cons, but I like the fact that, first of all, it's free. It's also one that distributes to all platforms on your behalf. So, for example, I literally post my episode after I've recorded it, and obviously after it's been edited, and we'll talk about editing as well, but I literally only have to post it in one place. So I have my account on anchor.fm/Let's Talk Loyalty. They give you a domain. They even create a website for you. And once you're working with a hosting platform, they'll submit it to Apple and Spotify and Google Podcasts and, 100 other podcast platforms that you will probably never have heard of. So it's one centralized place. So I think it's important to pick one. And again, maybe in the beginning, free makes sense for a lot of people. And I know Anchor have a commercial opportunity as well. If you want to take advertising within your podcast, they can facilitate and make all of that happen. I don't use that monetization option, but it does exist on Anchor.
Fantastic insights for us there, Anchor FM. I'm definitely going to be looking at that one because I don't want to be reaching out to millions of different platforms, and anything
for sure.
Is a blessing.
Yeah.
We as Toastmasters, we've been challenged, obviously, like the whole world, by this COVID situation. Has it presented any unusual challenges for you as a podcaster?
Most definitely, Ian. The most practical being that I could no longer go to my studio, which I mentioned I like to use. And the benefit of a professional studio is it's obviously completely soundproof, but it also has soft walls. So there's black foam on all of the walls. And because that was obviously closed down for a certain length of time, what I found from a particular face group that I'm a member of, that I really, really enjoy being a group with, they advised that you record in a wardrobe, which I thought was absolutely hysterical. And I thought they were joking until I saw pictures of people sitting in their wardrobe with their microphones and their laptops. And so I, every single week, would sit and face into the clothing, which is essentially you need a soft background for sound to be absorbed. And so for me, throughout COVID, I sat in my wardrobe with no light, and I recorded in that quite a funny environment.
And were you going to the sound recording studio from episode number 1? Was it straight away you took that professional step?
Not quite, Ian. I did try a couple of positions and places, including meeting rooms and co-working spaces, and there was a couple of disasters along the way. And it's only when you realize how sensitive, any particular room is, or how empty it can sound. So I'm lucky in my apartment, for example, I've one big open plan space, but actually it's very echoey. So trying to record there just actually doesn't sound good. So I really learned learned actually I need control of my environment, and I pay for that space now. It's very affordable because I'm a member. It's called In5 if anybody's interested, and they have 3 locations around Dubai for different purposes, but In5 Media is the one where you can access media services such as a green room, for example, if you want to do video, or there are 2 sound studios. And I literally pay 100 dirhams for a half a day, and I can record 2 podcasts in that 4 hours. And it's a really good use of my time. So I drive there, I record, and I come home.
Wow, that's incredible to discover how cost effective using professional environments like that really is.
It really makes a difference, for sure.
Yeah, that's great insights for us there. Have you got any tips and advice for us regarding actually editing the final edition once it's been produced?
Well, my advice firstly is if you can avoid doing it, then avoid doing it. And I mean that in 2 different ways. First and foremost, obviously as you're recording, your ideal scenario is that the content is as intended. So that there's no coughing, that there's no nothing said that's inappropriate, that you're uncomfortable with, either for you or for the guest. So for me, obviously we know it's not a live production, but I do always reassure the guests that anything can be edited afterwards. But what I have found is that I'm not very patient. So editing is extremely time consuming and very precise. So I've hired a professional sound engineer, and I also was delighted to find somebody who's extremely cost effective. He happens to be in the UK, but that's irrelevant because obviously, location doesn't matter. And literally I pay about £30 for each episode to be edited. And it means I can literally give him a set of instructions such as I coughed, or, this needs to change, or please insert some advertising. And obviously things like music can be edited in at the start and at the finish as well. And he can do that much more easily than I can. So it's very time consuming. If you enjoy it, I would say, of course, there are plenty of software platforms like Audacity is probably the most famous in terms of free. And the training course I did, in fact, did teach us how to use Audacity. And that's where I realized I really didn't want to do that part, and I didn't need to.
Yes. When it comes to outsourcing, I've even heard of people trying to outsource in a different time zone to where you are. So,
Totally.
for example, you might find a sound engineer that's on the other side of the world. You spend all day recording. They're just waking up, and you send them the file, and they're working on it all day, and they can turn it around while you're sleeping. So that was...
Totally. And I think they have to be very efficient as well, Ian. So my guy, for example, has a service level of 2 days. So I know even if I'm recording the same week as I'm releasing, I can make sure to turn it around, and he'll edit it super quickly. And even sometimes he's done it more quickly when I've been under pressure. So yes, it's extremely easy to get people who are available and more than comfortable to do that work. There are plenty of services available.
Fantastic. So our sound engineer has done the post-production editing.
Mm-hmm.
We now have our file that we're very happy with.
Mm-hmm.
Whose responsibility is it actually to get that out there? And are there any tags that we should be aware of or anything like this?
I mean, certainly the first time you set up on the likes of Anchor, for example, on the hosting platform, you'll put all of the show descriptions, and there's a load of fields in there. Again, I did a training course and that went through all of those. But to be honest, I don't feel in the long term that there's much to worry about. For me, the best advice I got is don't worry. Just stop expecting it to be perfect. I would definitely recommend for your first episode to make sure that you allow plenty of time for it to appear the first time. So Apple, for example, say that it can take up to 2 weeks for your first show to be published. After that, it normally gets live within, I would say, probably 12 hours. I don't know because I publish probably a couple of days in advance, but I can just schedule it. And once I say, yes, Anchor, here's the final version, press publish, it will appear at the required time on all of those platforms. So yes, you don't have to worry about anything except, as I said, give it plenty of time the first time.
Fantastic. And did you have a particular mentor that guided you through all of this process? Can you perhaps tell us a little bit about the help that you received along your journey?
Yes, I did. The most important is Seth Godin, I mentioned already, my favorite marketeer. He's world famous.
Yeah.
And because he was, first of all, recommending podcast, as I mentioned, but also running a program with some colleagues, I had confidence that it was worth the, I think, $200 I think I paid for that training course. And also within that, you get access to a community of people who will give you feedback as you're practicing. So it becomes a safe place to learn. And clearly there are, millions of free resources on YouTube and everywhere else. But for me, I'm very busy and I don't want to go and find who are the best people to teach me. And I want to know start to end, I haven't missed a step. So I liked a full comprehensive training program. And then I just also met a couple of people who were podcasting themselves. So I attended a couple of kind of workshops, maybe a little bit like this, where I got the reassurance I needed that it wasn't such a big deal. So sometimes you just need a final push for somebody to go, do you know what, just try, and you'll be surprised how easy it is.
Yeah, I think you're very wise to choose a world-class renowned marketeer to walk you through the steps and get you to this amazing level that you've reached now. It's great advice for everybody on the call, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And how do you try to improve your rankings? Is there a way of improving your rankings in the podcast, gaining popularity, establishing a tribe?
I mean, there's a lot to that, Ian. And again, as you said in the beginning, like I am a marketeer by nature. First and foremost, for me, it's purely on audience size. Now, again, what I want, particularly as a B2B podcaster, is I want the right audience. What I don't want is a load of people, maybe downloading it once and not listening again. So for me, I do build the listenership as carefully as I can. And in general, I do that by asking my guests to make sure after the recording has gone out and after the episode has aired, I also ask them to share with their network. So I only do actual promotion work on LinkedIn because, again, it's a B2B podcast. And I find that social media is extremely time consuming. So I don't want to be trying to manage communities within, for example, Instagram or Facebook, although in time I might start to do that. Now, clearly there are ratings, and some podcasters would be trading ratings with other podcasters. I don't like that idea. I don't think it fits with my own sense of integrity because then there's a vested interest. It probably does work in the short term, but I think, as we all know, digital algorithms are much smarter than we are. So over time, I think you're better off focused on creating good content and asking people that you know are enjoying that content to share it on your behalf. And then I believe it has a virtuous circle effect and it builds over time. So I prefer to do it that way more patiently than to go out and even do pay-per-click advertising, which is clearly an option, but not one I've done as yet. And while I think of it, sorry, Ian, one more recommendation is partnerships are a very good idea as well. So I did find a website that actually I was, whenever I was reading content online about my industry, it was always from the leading source. And in my industry, it's called The Wise Marketeer, which is an American website. And they always need content. And they kept asking me to write content and write articles. And I didn't want to do any writing. But instead, I said, look, why don't you promote my podcast as a new form of content for your audience? So now I'm in their email newsletter, which goes out to 12,000 people every week. So that builds my audience very effectively and very relevant.
Fantastic. And I believe you've done around 51 episodes now of Let's Talk Loyalty. And
yeah.
I'm sure there's been some highly memorable moments along the way. Would you care to share some of your favorite and most memorable moments you've had?
Sure. The strangest one was when I was in my professional podcasting studio, but it was a late evening recording. I was recording with somebody in the United States, and the people who run that facility thought I'd gone home, and they came in and turned off the lights and locked the door. And I was, then with no notes, in the darkness, wondering if I was going to stay there all night, trying to concentrate on still interviewing somebody and panicking about being locked in. So that was probably the the strangest one. And I guess on a more positive note, I have managed to get some guests who would be, I suppose, very high profile in my industry. So, for example, the professor of marketing for Wharton University in the United States, I have him as a guest on the show, and a gentleman who created the Net Promoter Score division for Bain and Company, a world famous management consulting firm. So he's been on my show as well. So they give me absolute highs as well. So I love to have guests like that.
Yeah, Net Promoter Score. We actually use that in our own company, and we see
Yeah.
that as like the gold standard of being assessed by your customers as whether you're a good company or a bad company. So
For
amazing
sure.
that you've had that involvement.
Yeah.
And formerly as well, of course, you've been a Toastmaster like many of us here on the call. Have you found that that experience of Toastmasters has given you an advantage in any way as a podcaster?
Definitely, Ian. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Toastmasters, and I have certainly recommended it to an awful lot of people in any professional networks I'm in. I would say I have not done nearly enough with Toastmasters. My intention has always been to go back and do more. And I fundamentally believe that actually each format probably needs a different type of training. So for me, Toastmasters is for, very much for stage presence and all of those type of skills, which I really still believe I need to do a lot of work on. So yeah, I think for me, the positivity and the unconditional support in Toastmasters was totally unexpected, and really incredibly just powerful to give you the confidence that you need. And then practical advice, because for example, in Ireland, we tend to speak quite quickly. So I kept getting the same feedback, slow down. So I finally learned the lesson. So definitely extremely useful.
Fantastic. Now, we have a lot of people on the call, and I think, there's quite a lot of different individuals that would love to ask one or two questions. So if you don't mind, perhaps if I ask Anoop to rejoin us, I think he's been reading one or two of the questions that people have been asking in the chat. Could Anoop, maybe you can share with us some questions for Paula?
Sure, thank you, Ian. Paula, I'll go with the first one here, which is on the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any tips to do a podcast where you are having conversations with multiple people sitting in different locations? Can you recommend any platforms? What are the things that we need to watch out for, especially in this kind of situation where people are in multiple locations? Thank you.
For sure. Yes. It's a great question. For me, the most I've ever had is 2 guests plus myself. So I haven't tried to manage anything more than that. There's a couple of things. First of all, as I said, I use Zoom. That doesn't change. So everybody logs into the exact same software, even no matter how many guests there are. What I have found is the single most important thing is obviously to make sure the audio is recorded in split tracks. And there's a particular setting in Zoom where you only have to tick it once, and it will just say record each audio file separately. And all that does is it means my sound engineer can make any changes if he needs to, for example, for one guest rather than any other. So that's extremely important, whether there's one guest or more than one. And my final point is, I actually think it's quite difficult to manage the energy of even one guest, never mind 2. I cannot imagine trying to be fair and facilitate any more than that. So I would just be careful with not being too ambitious with having a lot of guests on one show.
Thank you so much. That is fascinating, and something which I really didn't know about Zoom.
Yeah.
Maybe I should try that.
No problem.
So another question that we have is, would you suggest starting a generic topic like marketing, or very specific like how you have picked on loyalty marketing? How specific is too specific that people will not listen to it and audience levels are low?
I cannot imagine anything be too niche. And all of the advice that any marketeer will give you is that focus on the niche. So I think what you will find is, particularly as podcasting has been around for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years now, if you try and do something like marketing, I think it's extremely difficult to build an audience. And there are obviously charts, and I know I've been in the top 200, for example, of marketing in the US. So to me, that's a massive achievement. But I don't think you can be overly focused focused on that because, again, my objectives are not about ranking in the charts. My objectives are learning, sharing, and actually monetization, which we should probably talk about as well. But my advice is go niche, and with something that you are totally passionate about, no matter what it is. I fundamentally believe with 7 billion people on the planet, you'll find your tribe. You just need to keep showing up.
Thank you. I love the focus.
It works.
Next is what we have is, can you suggest ideas, tips to break through the noise of multiple podcasts and make your podcast unique and different from the rest?
I think that comes to the, again, probably quite cliched advice, but it's totally true. And that is just to be authentic and to share your genuine personality, and not try and be something other than your genuine self, because it won't work, first of all. Listeners will pick it up straight away. And I think what people buy into is their unique understanding of you as a broadcaster. And what has really amazed me, and maybe another high point I might have mentioned or should have mentioned to Ian's question, is when I meet people who listen to my podcast, they're kind of like groupies. They're like they feel like my best friend, and I'm like, I don't know you at all, but anyway, I'm happy that you're my friend. But it's incredible that people really do like, and they feel like they know you. So I don't think you can fake it in any shape or form, and I don't think there's a formula that you can say, look, if you do it this way, it'll dominate the chart. So I guess it also comes back to your objectives. But for me, if your intention is to add value from the outset and be authentic, then you will not fail.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure it's a related question. This is some of the pre-work that goes on into constructing an episode.
Okay.
How do you approach guests to attend or come in as a guest on your podcast? Any tips to make them say yes? I'm sure you've had a fascinating set of people who have already been on that 51 episodes. So
totally.
How do you do that?
So it's certainly difficult, and again, perhaps the most underestimated part of the job. Again, I'm lucky I've worked in professional sales, so I know a certain amount of what's needed to balance between, first of all, finding the right guest, secondly, being respectful of their time, thirdly, positioning it as a benefit to them, and also being extremely professional about it. So one thing I did from the very outset was I decided this would be a professional podcast. Plenty of people podcast for personal reasons, and that's fine. But I created a background briefing document. So if I am pitching to somebody to come on the show, I can send them that document to show, this is how many people are listening. This is the type of people who are listening. These are the type of questions I'm likely to ask you. These are all of the logistics. And I think they find that very reassuring, that I'm not just winging it, that this is something that I take seriously and that I respect their reputation, and also that my intention is to make them look good. So, the media can be quite negative in certain countries, for example, and that's not the type of podcast I want to have. So I think there's an element of reassurance, and also, I suppose, a respect. If you want big brands, like I've had British Airways, I've had Emirates, Etihad, a lot of very big companies, they will expect to sign off on the final product before it's released. And you have to facilitate that with their PR teams and with all of the various stakeholders that they have to manage, and to say, okay, this one might take a month to get approved, but I'm prepared to wait, because otherwise I risk embarrassing them or them being uncomfortable. And that's a disaster from my perspective in terms of my relationship with my guest. I need them to feel good so I can maybe ask them back a second time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. We have one more question. I think this is answered in somewhat, especially your closet-related answer. I'm thinking of starting a podcast in audio, but also video format on my YouTube channel.
Okay.
Do you have any suggestions for the voice in the video format, as it cannot be in a closet?
Well, you'd be surprised. The video's focused out if you're in the closet. Like if you're facing the clothes, it's definitely, I wouldn't say that could be a deal breaker. I think from my perspective, and I guess that depends whether it's personal or professional. From my perspective, it's very easy, first of all, to find reasons not to start. And the best advice I got in the beginning was, it will never be perfect, and just start and show up consistently. For me, there is enough to understand and learn in one format, for me, audio, rather than trying to do video. Now, it sounds like that person already has a video channel. So I would say then, just go for it and get started. I literally haven't gone there because I want to do one thing at a time and do it, to a professional standard. But yes, there's a lot of people who recognize, I suppose, YouTube, as we probably all know, is the second biggest search engine on the planet. So there is audience building capacity if you are producing even just the audio format you can release on YouTube, I know, which again, I haven't done myself. But yeah, I don't want the headache of making sure I have, a full, makeup and professional background to do video. But I expect to go there at some point in the future.
As the yogis say, slowly, slowly, we'll get there.
Exactly. Yes.
So one more question. What do you think is the future of podcasting, say in the next 5 years or 10 years? What are the trends that you can foresee?
I think it will continue to grow exponentially. I also believe there will be much more short format. So as you know, my shows tend to be anything from 45 minutes to an hour. The advice is typically that the ideal format would be 20 minutes. The reason being that the average commute in the United States is apparently 20 minutes. So somebody can listen to one show on that drive. But there's an interesting format which I'm exploring, and it's called flash briefings. And it's essentially like a 1 minute or 2 minute podcast, which is released in audio form on voice assistant. So like Alexa or Google Assistant. And I fundamentally believe, in fact, that voice, not just in podcast format, I believe voice as a user interface is the next big thing. And the CEO of Microsoft said the same thing. We will not be Googling in 10 years' time, for example. Everything will be done by voice. It is the most intuitive form of human communication. It's super easy, and particularly to all demographics. So I'm hoping to get my 80-year-old father set up on a voice assistant when I'm home next in Ireland. And I really believe that he can use it, everyone can use it. So it's all about voice as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. And I think even Microsoft CEO said text search is going away.
Totally.
It's going to be voice search.
Yes, it is. Definitely.
So I think we have a few more questions, if you don't mind
Totally.
answering them. Yeah, okay.
Sure.
So what's your take on the podcast channel to sustain itself through sponsorship or affiliate marketing? What's your advice and experience on the same?
So I have a very clear approach. And again, I suppose I'm lucky that many years ago I did sell digital advertising. So I have some idea how it works. But having said that, I have chosen a different direction. And I don't know if anybody's selling sponsorship the same way I am. But just this week, for example, I signed my second sponsorship deal. So I have been very clear, first of all, in my policy for guests. I don't bring on anybody who is selling to my industry, like the technology platform providers or product suppliers. And I get lots of requests from those people because clearly my audience is very valuable to them. So anyone who does want to pitch to my audience, I will offer them the opportunity to sponsor a show, which I have, obviously an advertising rate card. So I do one advertising slot before the interview and I have one after the interview. So I just have two 30-second slots available. So that's the way I've chosen to do it, which is very similar to how radio advertising works. With affiliate models, it's very much on a CPM model or cost per thousand. And that I believe is really much more relevant to consumer podcasts if you have tens of thousands of listeners. But again, I'm in B2B. And to give you an idea, for example, if somebody wants to build a loyalty program and buy a new technology platform, they'd be spending millions of dollars. So therefore, for those platforms to get in front of my audience, I think it's valuable to them that they can spend advertising money to do that. So I think the affiliate model, as I mentioned, through the likes of Anchor is available to plug in. I do think sometimes they can interrupt your show. I don't know how much control you have over the placement. But for me, I'm not interested in numbers. I'm interested in the quality of my audience and then building it over time. I only want the right people listening and even the right people advertising. So I control it myself.
Thank you so much. I think there's a related question. Is there any other method of monetizing your podcast? It's a
There
very open
is.
question. Yeah.
Yes, no, it's a good one, and I haven't tried it, but there's one that's talked about a lot on the groups online. For example, it's called Patreon, 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 where essentially people can pay per listen, for example. So they make donations. I believe it's on a voluntary basis, so I think it's optional. But I presume you could also obviously build a membership site where people would have to pay to be maybe a member of your organization to get access to your podcast. So I don't know the ins and outs of it, but definitely you can ask people to make donations or contributions. And Patreon is one platform definitely that does that.
Great. Thank you. This one question, which is about the voice. We talked about, you have a great voice and you've had some practice, especially growing up. But how good is voice in order to become a good podcaster?
I think it probably, first of all, depends on who your audience is. I think it's important that your audience likes your voice. What most podcasters will tell you is that they don't like their own, especially the first time you listen. Most people really actually dislike the sound of their own voice. I think it's really important, though, that you just go, okay, this is what it is. And yes, maybe I can do training or maybe I can practice. But at the end of the day, I don't think you can fundamentally change it. And again, we're all human beings and we have our own tribes and our own communities. So for me, I know that, my accent, for example, is not very Irish or very anything. It's quite neutral. And I guess that's something that if you were to aspire to something, it might be to keep it quite neutral. But I don't think it's that easy to learn how to change your voice. So I would say just try and be as clear and articulate as you can without trying to be anything different.
Thank you. I think that's a wrap in terms of the Q&A. Over to you, Ian. Thank you so much for answering
No
all
problem.
the questions. Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you for everybody that asked a question there, and we all gained some really valuable insights from Paula. I'd like to invite, actually, one of the people behind this initiative was our area director, divisional director, actually, Stephen George. I'd like to invite Stephen to perhaps come on to screen now and share a few words and insights with us, please.
Thank you, Ian. First of all, thank you so much, Paula. I mean, I've heard a lot of podcasts as well as videos about podcasting, and I think this is definitely one of the best that we heard. And I absolutely love the last question, Anoop, that you had asked. It's so true that she has a beautiful voice, and not everyone has that sort of a voice that, that's very, if you just close your eyes and just listen to it, you can just keep listening to it. But what I absolutely loved about this, Paula, is the fact that you're an ex-gardener, you're an ex-Toastmaster, and you openly said about the fact that Toastmasters has helped you. So we in Division L and in District 105 have something called a #MyWhy. That means you explain why did you join Toastmasters and why are you still in Toastmasters. So I think we should just edit that part out
Yes.
and just put it as her my why. But thank you so much, Paula, for spending time with us. It really means a lot that you, in spite of not being a Garden Toastmasters Club member, you took time out. In this audience, we have people from across the district. We have people from Abu Dhabi, we have people from Oman. So we are all here to listen to you, and we really respect the time that you have given for us. We thank Toastmaster Ian for doing a fantastic job. I mean, the questions were just to the point. I mean, you did your homework, right? You did it straight there. You showed that you're a true president. Great job, Ian. And it won't be complete, Paula, and the rest of the audience without honoring somebody who was the brainchild of this. So now Ian said that it was the division director. I really did not have to do much because I have somebody who was like an extension of mine, the assistant division director, public relations, and that is Toastmaster Anoop. The way he has taken the PR, I don't know if you know Paula, but he was actually the district PR ambassador last year because phenomenal job. The next thing I did is called him up and said, hey, can you help out? And just as how easily you said yes to the podcast, he just said, yes, let's do it. And he's doing, so all this that you see, the fantastic virtual backgrounds, is all done by this man right here. So can we have a big round of applause for Toastmaster Anup? And
Well
give
done, Anup.
him
Yes.
some honor. So
Great
thank
job, man.
you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the kind words, Stephen. And it's a pleasure because I've been talking to Paula saying, why don't you come back to Gardens and we will have a special session. And we were looking forward to it, doing it before June. And that's when, COVID happened. And I think her schedule also didn't permit. So then after the new year, we said, okay, now I've taken up a new position and let's spread this knowledge and this word. And she was also hitting that 50th episode of her podcast. We said, okay, that's full circle and you'll have a lot of stories to say and share with a lot of Toastmasters and budding Toastmasters and who wanted to start their own podcast. So I said, okay, let's start this. And here we are. Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on. And of course, Toastmaster Ian, you've done a fantastic, phenomenal job of being a host today. Thank you so much.
Well done.
Thank you very much.
Sure,
Would you like to have a group photograph before we close off?
yeah, before
Sure.
we also have District 105 PR Manager, Deepa. Are you there by any chance?
Deepa is with us.
I'm not sure. Yeah, she's one of the participants, and I'm not sure.
Maybe Stephen, you need to make her the co-host.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's why she can't unmute her. I'm so sorry. Took additional security this time so that we could have a proper recording. We'll make you, yes, asked to unmute.
Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Deepa. Please, a few words from you.
It was really a nice, learning session. I was listening from the beginning, and then my God, because we recently started a podcasters a club in Area 28. Area Director Jensen had taken the lead, and this is a brilliant session. I think we would have invited all podcasters from there also. It's a good learning. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you, Deepa.
Thank you very much. And maybe you have to come and help us over there also.
No problem.
Or we will, for sure, we will use the recording first, and then only we will trouble you. And I know
Okay.
you have to conduct this again. Good learning. It was really amazing.
Great. Glad it was useful.
Thank you, Deepa.
Thank you, Anoop and Ian. Very nice.
Thank you, Deepa. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So just like how Ian said, can we have everyone switch on your videos? I hope you guys can. I can unmute them. Perfect. All right. Anup, can you take a screenshot? But before that, Raji, Rahul, Adnan, Rubel, Midhat, Lamya. Oh, Lamya is here. Nice to see you. All right. Can we have everyone switch on your video? Anup, you're taking the screenshot?
He's on mute now.
Done.
Done?
Hey.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Okay, so thank you so much, guys. We're finishing 4 minutes before time. Once again, thank you, Paula, for joining us. Really means a lot. And we will have this recording go across the District 105. Thank you so much for adding value in our life. And thank you, Ian. Thank you, Anup. Thank you, Deepa, and all the audience for joining us today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.